So, Richard, we'll talk about your work in the exhibition now. So, two pieces, Untitled 9 Blocks 1 and Untitled 9 Blocks 2. And they're on the wall, they're numbers 70 and 71 at the far end. Would you like to talk a little bit about your work and the submission?
Yeah, submitting work is always interesting. I mean, to be honest, I thought the piece that wasn't selected was the piece that probably would be selected. But it all sort of circulates around the same sort of theme that I've probably been exploring since O levels. I was really lucky to have an art master that encouraged us to look a bit, well, quite a big bit broader than the O level A level syllabus, and really prepared me for foundation course. And one of the areas that I discovered at that time was collage, and it's been and also the colour white, and those fabrics have been part of my my art practice, my theatre practice, ever since. And I think, you know, if I looked at work, if it still existed from back in that time, one could see a very clear connection, and not sure how much development really. But the grid, the structure of the grid, the cube, has become increasingly important to me as a sort of as a safety, as a way of containing what is probably quite random ideas, fairly sort of unconscious working with materials, with images, with textures, which can be difficult. I've found difficult to control. So a grid structure for me has been a framework that I've found very reassuring, and allows me, I think, to make an interplay and find a tension between the sort of strict regime of the square, and it is very much the square that I'm interested in. I find the square a very safe place. Rectangles I find, well, basically they're squares that can't make up their mind, and triangles, completely bizarre. So the square and the cube I've worked with, and I come back to time and time again, and even in my in the other area of my practice, which is wood sculpture, everything gets contained in a cube, in a small small cube. So it exists there. But as far as these pieces of work are concerned, they are based on cubes. I have a collection of small 20mm blocks that I bought from Habitat when it was closing down in Norwich, which I use continuously. The subject for these particular pieces are difficult probably to discern, but there are numbers. They are numbers that I collected photographically in another project, a project of finding 1 to 100 numbers. And I've used that material in a number of different ways, and the scraps of that project still resonate through that work there. And there are many more of them. I have many of these blocks, and they configure themselves in different ways, always tending towards the square in some way or another. As I said before, they'll probably, when they come down from this exhibition, they'll probably go back into the studio and probably be reworked into something else. That's the continuum that I find, again, important and reassuring in the way that I work. I think, like many artists, I have an issue with the notion of finishing. I'm not sure what it means. I work in other ways. I turn wood. I make small objects, and that's a very definite process. You know, there's a clear workflow towards completion, and once that piece is completed, it does, you know, it probably has a function, you know, maybe a spoon or a bowl or whatever. But as far as the surface work is concerned, and also the sculptural work that I do, there's a relationship there between three dimensions. There's always a three-dimensional element in my surface work, and there's always increasingly there's a painterly aspect. Ruth will be alarmed about this, that most of the work that was in the exhibition recently is now being painted.